Here's a question that will haunt you. What if I told you the British didn't conquer India? They didn't need to. Because India was handed over to them, not through one battle, but through 4 signatures. 4 moments where power was legally, quietly, irreversibly transferred, while everyone was watching the wars. The real takeover was happening in treaty rooms. By the time anyone realized what had been signed away, it was already too late. This is the story of how an empire of 300 million people was handed over to a trading company, one document at a time. And if you think this is ancient history, the same playbook has appeared many times across history. Let me show you how. Let's destroy the comfortable myth first. You were told India fell because the British were superior. Better weapons, better tactics, better armies. That's not what happened. When the East India Company arrived in 1608, they weren't conquerors. They were beggars. They literally prostrated themselves before Mughal Emperor Jahangir and pleaded for permission to trade. They had no army worth mentioning, no territory, no political power, no respect. For 150 years, they remained exactly what they claimed to be: merchants, paying rent, paying bribes, paying homage. So here's the question nobody asks in textbooks. How does a company of traders become the ruler of the world's richest civilization? The answer isn't in military history. It's in 4 documents, 4 moments where Indian rulers made deals they thought were temporary, agreements they believed they could control. They were wrong. The first signature came in 1757, and it looked like a battle. June 23, 1757, the Battle of Plassey. History calls it a battle. It was a transaction. Here's what your textbook says. Robert Clive defeated the Nawab of Bengal at Plassey with superior British tactics. Here's what actually happened. The Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Daulah, arrived with 50,000 soldiers. Clive had 3,000. On paper, not even close. But the battle never happened. Because 3 weeks earlier, in a secret midnight meeting, the British had bought the Nawab's own commanders. Mir Jafar, his military chief. Rai Durlab, his senior general. Jagat, Seth Bengal's richest banker. The deal was simple. Stand down during battle. We'll make you the next Nawab. You'll be rich and protected. When the battle began, the Nawab's army just stood there, confused, leaderless, paralyzed. Clive's cannons fired. It was over in 3 hours. Siraj-ud-Daulah fled, was captured, and executed that night. Mir Jafar became the new Nawab and signed his first order: transfer all of Bengal's treasury to the East India Company. No city was burned. No empire officially ended. But Bengal, the richest province in the world, quietly changed hands. £30 million in immediate treasure, £3 million annually in tribute. From that moment, the East India Company no longer needed Britain. It had become richer than most European kingdoms. But here's what nobody realized. That was just the first signature. 8 years later, they made it legal. August 12, 1765, the Treaty of Allahabad. After Plassey, the British controlled Bengal, but they didn't legally own it. That changed with one afternoon meeting. The setup: Shah Alam II, the Mughal emperor, was broke, powerless, and desperate. The once mighty Mughal throne had been reduced to begging for protection. The British offered him a deal. We'll give you a pension. We'll provide military protection. We'll recognize you as emperor. In exchange, you sign over the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. The emperor asked, "What is Diwani?" "Just revenue collection rights, Your Majesty." "You keep the title. We handle the paperwork." He signed. What he actually signed away: the legal right to collect all taxes from 30 million people. With one signature, the company became the official tax authority over India's 3 richest provinces. They gained £40 million in annual revenue. They could now use Indian money to fund armies to conquer the rest of India. And it was perfectly legal, approved by the Mughal emperor himself. When Robert Clive received the signed treaty, he wrote to London, "The company is now the sovereign of territories larger than Great Britain, and commands revenue exceeding that of the king." A private corporation now controlled more wealth than European kingdoms, all from one piece of paper. But here's the terrifying part. Other rulers saw this and thought, "That won't happen to me. I'm smarter. I'll make a better deal." They didn't realize what the British had just perfected. Because the next strategy wouldn't require betrayal, it would require consent. By the late 1700s, the British controlled Bengal's money. But India was still politically fragmented. Hundreds of kingdoms, rivalries everywhere, wars that never truly ended. And that's when the British realized something crucial. They didn't need to conquer India by force. They just needed Indian rulers to invite them in. In 1798, Lord Wellesley became Governor General. He looked at the map of India and understood the math immediately. Conquering 500 kingdoms by war would take generations. It would bankrupt the company. It would provoke endless resistance. So instead, he designed a system that made conquest unnecessary. It was called the Subsidiary Alliance. On paper, it sounded reasonable, even generous. British diplomats approached Indian rulers with a calm, reassuring offer. "Your Majesty, you are surrounded by enemies. Your army is expensive. Your rivals are growing stronger. Let us protect you. You can disband your army. We'll station British troops in your territory. You only pay for their upkeep. And we'll appoint a British resident to advise you." Think of it as insurance. To rulers constantly threatened by neighbors, it sounded like survival. They were promised protection without war, security without expense, power without risk, a throne that would remain theirs. What ruler wouldn't sign? But the moment they did, everything changed. Because once a kingdom signed a subsidiary alliance, its army was disbanded. Its forts were occupied by British troops. Its treasury began draining to pay for its own occupation. Its foreign policy was surrendered. Its ruler could not negotiate, fight, or act without British approval. The British resident became the real authority. The ruler became ceremonial. If a king protested, the British documented mismanagement. If he resisted, they accused him of violating the treaty. And if he hesitated, they reminded him he had no army left. Between 1798 and 1818, the trap closed. Hyderabad signed first, then Mysore, after Tipu Sultan was killed, then Awadh, then the Maratha Confederacy, piece by piece, then dozens of smaller states. Each ruler believed the same thing. I'm buying time. I'm avoiding war. I'll regain control later. They didn't understand the rule had changed. Protection and conquest now ended the same way, under British control. But one kingdom proved something far more disturbing. Even absolute loyalty could not save you. The tragedy of Awadh. For 50 years, Awadh was the British Empire's most faithful ally. The Nawab of Awadh did everything right. He lent the British millions during wars. He supplied troops whenever asked. He signed every treaty placed in front of him. He never rebelled, never resisted, never challenged British authority. He truly believed loyalty was protection. In 1856, that illusion shattered. The British Governor-General, Lord Dalhousie, sent him a letter. It was polite, administrative, final. Your kingdom has been poorly governed. We are annexing Awad for the benefit of the people. The Nawab was stunned. I have been your ally for half a century. I have given you everything you asked. What have I done wrong? The British response was simple. You signed the subsidiary alliance. You have no army. You have no choice. The Nawab was removed from his palace, given a pension, exiled to Calcutta. He spent his final years writing letters to British officials and Parliament, begging for justice, begging for explanation. They ignored every one. He died heartbroken in 1856. The lesson was unmistakable. Even perfect loyalty could not protect themselves, because once power was signed away, there was nothing left to defend. But the British still faced a problem. A few kingdoms remained independent. Their rulers hadn't signed alliances. They hadn't rebelled either. So the British invented a final solution, one that didn't require consent, or loyalty, or even war, just a loophole. By the late 1842s, most of India was already under British control. The revenue flowed through company offices. The armies answered to British officers. The administration spoke English law, but a few kingdoms still remained independent. They hadn't rebelled. They hadn't allied. They simply existed. And for the British, that was unacceptable. So, in 1848, Governor-General Lord Dalhousie introduced the final mechanism. It was called the Doctrine of Lapse. The logic sounded bureaucratic, neutral, almost technical. In Indian tradition, rulers sometimes adopt heirs. But British law does not recognize adopted succession. So if a ruler dies without a biological son, his kingdom automatically lapses to the British. No invasion, no treaty negotiation, no justification beyond legal wording. Inheritance was turned into annexation. Between 1848 and 1856, kingdoms disappeared one by one. Satara, Jaipur, Sambalpur, Baghat, Udaipur, Nagpur. Each time, the explanation was identical. No biological heir. Nothing personal. It's just the law. Power wasn't seized. It was absorbed. Then came Jhansi. In 1853, the Raja of Jhansi died suddenly. His widow, Rani Lakshmibai, adopted a son the day before his death. The adoption followed Indian tradition. British officials were present. The ceremony was documented. She sent a formal petition to the Governor-General. Please recognize my adopted son. You witnessed the adoption. This is our law. Dalhousie replied, adopted heirs are not recognized. Jhansi now belongs to the British. You will receive a pension. You must leave the palace. She refused. She wrote back a single line that would echo through history. Main apni Jhansi nahi dungi. I will not surrender my Jhansi. When rebellion spread across India in 1857, she did not hesitate. She defended Jhansi against siege. She led cavalry charges. She fought in open battle. She died at 29 years old, sword in hand, still resisting. But here is the tragedy. By the time she fought back, the legal theft had already occurred. The doctrine of lapse had already been accepted elsewhere. The precedent was set. The system was complete. Look at the sequence. 4 signatures, 4 stages, 1,757 Plassey. The violent opening, betrayal disguised as battle, 1,757 765 Treaty of Allahabad. The legal cover. The emperor himself made it legitimate. 1798. 1818. Subsidiary alliance. The voluntary surrender. Protection that erased sovereignty. 1848. 1856. Doctrine of lapse. The final phase. No consent required. No pretense left. Each stage more refined. Each stage harder to resist. Each stage more permanent. By the time rebellion came in 1857, India no longer controlled its revenue, its armies, its diplomacy, its administration. The rebellion was massive, brave, and doomed, because it was fighting paperwork with swords. So here is the real question. Did India fall to the British? Or was it signed away by rulers who believed they were making smart, temporary deals? This is not a story about villains alone. It is a story about incentives, about choosing short-term survival over long-term sovereignty, about believing control remains after authority is transferred, about mistaking legality for safety. History shows this pattern repeating. Across continents, across centuries, the names change, the language evolves, the structure remains. Offer what is desperately needed. Make it legal. Wait for dependency. Extract everything. By the time resistance forms, the framework is already locked in. History does not always announce its turning points with battles. Sometimes it whispers. A treaty signed at midnight. An alliance that feels reasonable. A clause that looks temporary. And decades later, people ask, how did we lose everything? The answer is rarely dramatic. One signature at a time. One compromise at a time. One generation choosing stability over sovereignty. The British didn't conquer India. India was handed to them. Quietly. Legally. Irreversibly. Empires do not always collapse in fire and blood. Some are transferred. On paper, in offices, by people who believe they will fix it later. History remembers them the same way. Not for how loudly they fell, but for how quietly they disappeared. If this changed how you see history, and how you see the present, subscribe. Because the strategies that dismantled empires centuries ago are still studied, refined, and reused. Most people won't see them coming. Most will believe they're making smart deals until they realize they already signed away their future. The choice is simple. See the pattern or become part of it.